Diddy murdered priest at church to cover up clues. Kask Patel releases shocking video in court. The federal courtroom in Los Angeles was silent. Not tense, not hushed, silent, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The morning had started like every other day in this high-profile trial, but everything changed the moment Special Prosecutor Kash Patel stood and requested permission to introduce a new piece of evidence. "Your Honor," Patel began, voice, even posture firm, "the government respectfully moves to admit a recently decrypted audio file received through an anonymous tip and verified by our forensic audio specialists. The speaker is the defendant, Sean Combs." A rustle moved through the gallery. Diddy, seated at the defense table, narrowed his eyes. His attorney, visibly thrown, objected immediately. "Your Honor, we request a sidebar. This so-called evidence was not disclosed during discovery." Judge Robin Tarnowski leaned forward. "Mr. Patel, explain." Patel took a breath. The file came from a source known to the FBI as Father Francis Leary, the late priest at St. Augustine's Cathedral. It was recorded during what we understand was an unorthodox confessional session. The content suggests acknowledgement of the defendant's criminal operations. The priest died under suspicious circumstances 3 weeks ago. Gasps followed. The defense objected again, citing religious confidentiality, but Patel was ready. "We have legal precedent, Your Honor. In instances where a religious confession includes threats or descriptions of ongoing harm, privilege does not apply." The priest took steps to encrypt and deliver this file, bypassing traditional ecclesiastical boundaries. He feared retaliation. Judge Tarnowski paused. She turned to Diddy. "Mr. Combs, do you wish to comment on this?" Diddy didn't move. The judge ruled. The file would be played in open court. A technician rolled in a laptop. Patel gave a nod. The audio clicked on. It began with the unmistakable voice of Sean Combs. His tone was shaken, his breath ragged. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just wanted control. The money, the silence, the power. The parties got out of hand. They came for the brand, they stayed because they were afraid to leave." The courtroom froze. "I told them once you're in, you stay. I paid them, gifted them, kept them close. But yeah, sometimes I threatened. You can't build an empire with hesitation, and when someone talks too much, you handle it. You scare them. You record them. You have something to hold over them." Silence again. Then his voice cracked. "There were nights I couldn't sleep, not because of guilt, but because I knew it would all unravel, not if, but when." The audio ended. Judge Tarnowski stared ahead. Even the jury seemed paralyzed. Patel let the silence sit, then spoke. "The prosecution contends this tape validates multiple witness accounts. It proves premeditation. It aligns with financial records and victim testimonies." The defense stammered. "Your Honor, we challenge the authenticity of this tape. We request an independent review." "Granted," the judge said, "but the jury has heard it. That will not be undone." Outside the courtroom, reporters typed like mad. Inside, Diddy's carefully curated image began to crack. This wasn't leaked footage or accusations from disgruntled employees. This was his own voice. That afternoon, Kash Patel presented more. In addition to the recording, forensic specialists have confirmed that Father Leary died from digitalis poisoning. Prior to his death, he sent an encrypted drive to the FBI and wrote a handwritten note now in evidence which reads, "If I die, it wasn't an accident." More gasps. Patel looked directly at the jury. Father Leary feared for his life after speaking with the defendant. His final act was to ensure justice had a voice. The weight of those words fell heavily. In the defense camp, murmurs and frantic scribbles continued. Diddy sat still, no sunglasses, no bravado, just a man watching his world cave in. The judge adjourned for the day. Outside, protesters chanted. Victims' advocates held signs with names. The media swarmed. Inside, Kash Patel remained in the courtroom, staring at the now empty witness stand. The tape had changed everything. This wasn't just another celebrity case anymore. It was the beginning of reckoning. The tension in the courtroom was electric. All eyes were fixed on Special Prosecutor Kash Patel as he stood flanked by FBI agents and legal staff. Patel, a former national security prosecutor and a man of deep conviction, had been specially appointed to lead this high-profile case. His reputation for exposing corruption made him the perfect face for the Justice Department's reckoning with powerful figures. He approached the bench with a file in hand labeled Exhibit 24B, Confidential. Yet the judge, Robin Tarnowski, gave a slight nod. Kash addressed the jury with calm precision. Members of the jury, what you're about to hear is not speculation, not an allegation. It is the defendant, Mr. Sean Diddy Combs, speaking in his own voice. This evidence was lawfully obtained and verified. He paused for effect, then continued. The source of this audio is deeply unusual and may raise questions of morality, but its legality is not in doubt. The recording was made by a member of the clergy, Father Michael Donovan, during a private confession at St. Augustine's Church in Los Angeles. This confession was unusual in that it was not protected under religious privilege, due to the mental state of the penitent and the explicit permission given post-recording by the late Father Donovan himself before his tragic and suspicious death. The courtroom gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone knew that Father Donovan had passed recently, but the revelation of his involvement and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death sent a chill through the room. This audio was encrypted and given to federal authorities for safekeeping under the assumption it would only be released if Mr. Combs was formally charged. It is now unlocked, authenticated by 3 independent forensic audio labs, and ready to be presented. Judge Tarnowski gestured toward the technician. Play the recording. A static buzz filled the room. Then Diddy's voice emerged, slow, low, and shaken. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Not just once, not just in anger or impulse, but over years. I built something I thought made me invincible. I used my charm, my power, my network. I thought if I paid them off, gave them gifts, they wouldn't talk. And even if they did, who would believe them? The courtroom held its breath. Kash watched closely. Diddy's defense team sat frozen. Diddy himself looked away, jaw clenched, hands trembling. In the recording, Diddy continued, now more desperate. There was a girl, she said no. I knew she didn't want it, but I told myself she did, because that was easier than admitting I crossed a line. Gasps erupted. One juror dropped a pen. Another turned pale. Diddy's voice deepened, cracking with emotion. They came to my parties for opportunity. They left with secrets they couldn't tell. I made sure of that. NDAs, threats, gifts that weren't gifts. I told myself it was the cost of fame. Their cost, not mine. The courtroom remained deathly silent. Reporters feverishly scribbled notes. Victims in the gallery wept. I even told them consent is a contract. You take the money, the favor, the flight. That's a signature. That's your yes. But I knew better. I always knew. The confession ran for just under 9 minutes, but it felt like an hour. When it ended, Judge Tarnowski broke the silence. Let the record show that Exhibit 24B has been played in full. Kash stood again, his voice steady but firm. Members of the jury, this is not fiction. This is not exaggeration. This is Mr. Combs describing in his own words a system built to exploit and control, and it is our job to dismantle that system with the truth. As court-recessed chaos erupted outside, media vans lined the courthouse. Cable news alerts buzzed nationwide. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Warza, Diddy Confession, and Justice for the Victims trended within minutes. Inside whispers filled the corridors. Who gave the confession to the FBI? Why now? And why was Father Donovan, who had served the church for decades, dead within 24 hours, a coroner's report leaked? Father Donovan had died from an apparent heart attack, but trace elements of digoxin, a rare cardiac poison, were found in his bloodstream. The dosage was consistent with foul play. Kash held a press conference the next morning. We are now officially investigating the suspicious death of Father Michael Donovan as a federal homicide potentially connected to this case. We will leave no stone unturned. The statement sent shockwaves across the nation. Diddy's defense team scrambled. Their narrative of defamation collapsed under the weight of the confession and the murder investigation. The judge agreed to keep Diddy remanded without bail. At the next hearing, Special Agent Marcus Rivera took the stand. We've confirmed the audio file's origin from a secure encrypted drive handed directly to the FBI's Los Angeles division by Father Donovan. It contained a note. This man confessed. His words must see daylight. He paused. Within a week of receiving the file, we secured a warrant, began interviews, and reopened investigations into over 20 allegations. Mr. Combs' admissions align with victim accounts going back 20 years. The jury was visibly shaken. Kash introduced more damning evidence. A digital ledger listing names, payment amounts and code names, texts and emails discussing NDAs, surveillance footage from private events, and testimonies from former employees and victims. Each piece painted a clearer picture. Diddy's empire wasn't just built on music. It thrived on control, coercion, and calculated silence. The prosecution's star witness, Melissa Chen, a former executive assistant, took the stand. He called it the system, she said. Phones were taken at the door. Cameras placed where guests couldn't see. Girls were groomed, given clothes, exposure gigs. Then they were told, say no, and it all disappears. She described a party where she saw a model dragged to a private suite, then later passed out and bruised. I wanted to report it, I told him. He laughed and said, she signed the contract. That's her yes. Kash slowly walked to the center of the courtroom. Melissa, did Mr. Combs ever discuss what would happen if someone spoke out? Yes, she answered, voice shaking. He said no one would believe a nobody over me, and if they try, I'll make sure they never work again. A chilling silence followed. That evening, Diddy's legal team filed an emergency motion to suppress the confession. Violation of religious privilege, they argued, but Judge Tarnowski overruled it. The confession was provided voluntarily and released with full awareness by a now deceased party who gave it to law enforcement. It is admissible. Kash responded during court the next day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about religion, it's about justice. That confession is not sacred, it's evidence. Evidence that details a calculated predatory system of abuse and manipulation. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Some called for justice. Others, still loyal fans, denied everything. But the tide was turning. Inside, the prosecution was just getting started. The next witness, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma. She was set to explain how coercive control operates and why victims often remain silent. But first, Kash had one final announcement. We have obtained new evidence linking Mr. Combs to the death of Father Donovan. We intend to introduce this in court. The gallery erupted. It was no longer just a trial for exploitation. It was now a case of murder. And Kash Patel armed with a confession evidence. And the truth was just getting started. The court resumed its session the following morning with an unusual buzz in the air. Spectators whispered about the mysterious death of Father Gregory Bell, the priest who had unknowingly provided the FBI with the damning encrypted confession of Diddy. His sudden demise the night before had shocked the courtroom. The autopsy had confirmed traces of an exotic neurotoxin, one that left little behind. A quiet, clean execution. Kash Patel, who had been the recipient of the tape, now stood in the courtroom, not just as a special prosecutor, but as the guardian of justice for a voice that had been silenced forever. The gallery was filled beyond capacity with reporters and ordinary citizens eager to witness the fallout. Diddy, once an icon of untouchable fame, entered the courtroom with his legal team. Gone was his signature swagger. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes ringed with shadows from a sleepless night. Kash Patel addressed the court first. Your Honor, I would like to mark Exhibit 27. The cryptographic transcript of the confession, along with expert audio verification, and the chain of custody log provided by Father Bell's parish authenticated prior to his death. The judge nodded gravely. So entered. Proceed, Mr. Patel. Kash turned to the jury. You have heard Mr. Combs in his own words, recorded without his knowledge, yes, but authenticated, unedited, and verified by 3 forensic experts. You've seen the pieces. Now, let us understand the system he orchestrated. The next witness, Agent Marcus Rivera, returned to the stand. Kash guided him through the logistics of the digital decryption. When the confession was submitted, what steps did the Bureau take to ensure it was untampered? We used a dual-layer forensic analysis, Rivera replied. The recording was embedded within a secure Ethereum blockchain by the late Father Bell, who suspected he might be targeted if the confession was exposed. The room gasped. This audio was backed up in 3 separate physical drives across different church properties. 2 have since been recovered. The 3rd was stolen 2 days before Father Bell's death. Kash paused. And to your knowledge, is there any evidence that Father Bell had any contact with law enforcement prior to turning over the confession? None. He submitted it via encrypted courier drop-off with a typed letter addressed to the Bureau, stating he could no longer live with the knowledge. The recording itself had become the trial's gravitational center. The voice of a man boasting control, detailing drug use, blackmail, and the leverage of career ambitions for submission, it now held even more weight, knowing it had been spoken in what Diddy believed was sanctuary. Kash called his next witness Melissa Chen. Ms. Chen, you testified previously about operations inside Mr. Combs' household. Having heard the encrypted confession, do you recognize the language and tone of what was said? Absolutely, she said. That was his real voice, not just the sound, but the tone, the one he used when he wanted you to know you belonged to him. Kash leaned forward. Did you ever hear him say, consent is a contract? More than once, Chen replied. He said it like a mantra. Everyone on staff knew what it meant. It was his way of telling us and the women that giving in once meant permanent agreement. The jury's expressions darkened. Chen detailed the internal policies for events, NDAs, phone collection code phrases, for intoxication levels and tiered guest lists. The A-list girls were the most controlled, the ones he saw as assets. Kash Patel turned to the screen. Let's review Exhibit 28, he said, displaying emails between Chen and Diddy's logistics team. Highlighted was an exchange regarding an event at the Miami compound. Line 42, ensure the new recruits are reminded who's investing in their future. What does that mean? Chen answered flatly. It means remind them what they owe him. Remind them that their careers are tied to compliance. Then came the most chilling moment. Kash brought up a photo grainy time-stamped. It showed Diddy at the church steps, hoodie up, entering in the rain. Next to it, a short clip of audio, the beginning of the confession. They think they can forget who gave them the keys, but in this world, I write the contracts, spoken or not. The gallery was silent. A sacred space had been corrupted. Diddy had made his confession not as an act of redemption, but as a flex of power. It was a show of dominance even before God. Kash turned back to the jury. What you just heard wasn't regret. It was a man mocking the very idea of justice inside a church, knowing he was safe to say whatever he pleased. He paused for effect, but justice found its way in. The prosecution rested for the day, and as the courtroom emptied, murmurs of the priest's death returned. A candlelight vigil was being organized outside the courthouse by parishioners and supporters who believed Father Bell had sacrificed his life to expose the truth. The next morning, Diddy's defense team made a desperate attempt to exclude the confession, citing religious privilege, but the judge overruled it. The privilege of the confessional does not extend to confessions made without any priestly confidentiality invoked, and certainly not when the confessor brags about systematic exploitation. That day, Kash Patel delivered what would become known as the trial monologue. We must understand that power, real power, isn't just about wealth. It's about silence, about who can buy it, who can enforce it, and who dares to break it. Father Bell broke it, and paid the price. Diddy built a fortress on secrecy, coercion, and the illusion of choice. But illusion shatters. He turned toward the gallery. The dead cannot speak for themselves, but they can echo through what they leave behind. This recording, that's his echo, and now it's evidence. The judge called a recess, but the world outside the courtroom had already changed. Protesters held signs bearing Father Bell's name. News anchors debated the legal ethics of religious privilege in a justice system. Meanwhile, Diddy sat in his chair, unmoving, his illusion of invincibility bleeding out across headlines. By the time court reconvened the next morning, the public gallery was standing room only. The nation was watching, glued to news broadcasts, live streams, and social media updates. But inside the courtroom, it was the jury's faces that mattered most. 12 citizens, diverse in age, race, and background, now stared not just at a celebrity defendant, but at a man whose mask had been stripped away by his own voice, his own mother, and the death of a priest. Their expressions told a silent story of moral confrontation. Kash Patel began the session with a brief procedural update. Your Honor, we would like to move to formalize the integrity review of Exhibits 27 through 30. The judge nodded. Granted. Kash stepped away from the podium and allowed the court's final two witnesses to take the stand. First, a forensic accountant, and second, a psychological trauma expert. The accountant walked the jury through a complex network of hush payments, some disguised as consulting fees, others funneled through shell entities tied to Combs Global. Payments to known victims, payments to event coordinators, even payments to former staff members who had signed permanent gag orders. In your expert opinion, Kash asked, do these transactions reflect standard business expenses? No, the accountant replied. They indicate risk management through intimidation and concealment. Then came Dr. Helena Rhodes, a trauma psychologist who had interviewed several survivors. Dr. Rhodes warts. Kash began, you've reviewed testimony, seen victim statements, and analyzed the psychological profile of the accused. Based on your expertise, what stands out? Dr. Rhodes didn't flinch. Mr. Combs exhibits traits consistent with narcissistic abuse syndrome. He wielded emotional manipulation as effectively as physical coercion. Victims described not only fear, but deep confusion about consent, self-worth, and whether they were even allowed to say no. Kash gave her a moment. And how do these tactics typically function? They create dependency, a trauma bond. Victims stay silent not just out of fear, but because they're led to believe their silence is survival. It was a devastating moment. The jury, some with jaws clenched, others with eyes blinking back, emotion leaned forward. No longer abstract, the system Diddy had built now had language, shape, and consequence. Outside the courtroom, signs of shifting tides were everywhere. Diddy's music was being quietly removed from playlists. Brand endorsements were vanishing overnight. Anonymous sources in the entertainment industry began speaking out. Back inside, the defense tried once more to pivot. They called their final witness, Dr. Leonard Briggs, a psychiatrist, who had once evaluated Diddy after a car accident in 2011. Briggs argued for emotional instability, possibly borderline personality disorder, maybe even PTSD, but under Patel's sharp cross-examination, his testimony unraveled. Doctor, were you aware that your travel expenses to this trial were paid for by Combs Global? Briggs hesitated. Yes, but that's not unusual. Were you aware that your clinic received a $250,000 donation from a private holding tied to the defendant? Silence. I'll repeat the question. Yes. The courtroom rippled with murmurs. When the defense rested, it did so not with defiance, but with the brittle quiet of a crumbling edifice. Diddy barely looked at his team. His face was unreadable. Closing arguments began the next morning. Patel stood before the jury. This is not about celebrity. This is not about empire. This is about power used not to uplift, but to crush. You heard his mother, you heard the recordings, you saw the silence bought and enforced. Justice doesn't require us to erase the good someone did, but to confront the harm they inflicted. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. And today you have the power to do what no contract, no money, no NDA ever allowed: speak truth to power. The defense's closing was clinical restrained. They reiterated lack of direct evidence of physical abuse, asked the jury to focus only on provable crimes, and cast doubt on witness motivations. But the momentum had shifted. As the judge issued final instructions, he reminded the jury to consider all evidence, to deliberate without bias, and to weigh the facts beyond a reasonable doubt. Then the jury retired. For 2 full days they reviewed exhibits, listened again to audio, and reread Janice Combs's notes. And when they returned with a verdict, no one was surprised. We, the jury, find the defendant Sean Combs guilty on all counts. The courtroom was still. Then came a single sob from a survivor, then another. Quiet but unmistakably a release of years held inside. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and announced sentencing would take place in 4 weeks. As Diddy was escorted out in handcuffs, he passed the gallery where his mother sat, her face calm but wet with tears. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her. She nodded once, and he lowered his eyes. In the days following the guilty verdict, the world outside the courtroom seemed to reel. Diddy's empire, once towering and untouchable, crumbled like sand. Media outlets across the political spectrum dissected every moment of the trial, every sob, every phrase. Editorials questioned the culture of silence in the entertainment industry. Hashtags exploded. Podcasts, op-eds, emergency board meetings, everything buzzed with the realization that this was more than one man's downfall. Kash Patel, now hailed as a symbol of relentless justice, stood in front of the press briefly. This was not a victory, he told reporters. It was a reckoning. Inside, the Department of Justice agents reviewed the fallout from the encrypted church confession tape, how it had slipped through protective hands and surfaced only when Father Marcel's life ended under suspicious circumstances. Though the case against Diddy had concluded, investigations widened. The death of the priest was being treated as a probable homicide. The poison found in his system was rare military grade. Back in court, preparations for sentencing began. Victims were contacted and invited to submit statements. Some preferred anonymity, others prepared to speak in person. Janice Combs, living under protective custody since testifying, agreed to return. Before the hearing, Kash received a confidential document, a journal recovered from the priest's belongings. Pages filled with coded references to Diddy's visits. Lines like, "The king confesses but denies his crown of thorns." It wasn't admissible in the case already decided, but it helped DOJ agents construct a wider narrative, one of complicity, suppression, and silent observers. At the sentencing hearing, the court overflowed once again. The judge opened the session tone, heavy with gravity. Before we proceed to sentencing, the victims of these crimes have the right to speak. One by one, women stepped forward. A former intern spoke first. He told me I had 2 options, obedience or obscurity. I chose silence. I am reclaiming my voice today. A former assistant. He said contracts protected him. I learned later no contract can bind a bruised spirit. Another woman, a studio technician. He told me I was lucky to be noticed. I now know I was prey. Each voice etched deeper truth into the room's walls. Finally, Janice stood. Her presence quieted the space. I gave life to a son I believed would change the world for the better. Instead, I watched him believe he was above the world. She turned to the bench. Your Honor, no punishment today can undo what's been done, but it can set a standard. It can say to every victim who's been gaslit, shamed, silence that truth matters more than wealth. Diddy was asked if he wished to address the court. He stood trembling slightly. I am not the man I once was, he began. I cannot undo the harm, but I see it now. I lived in delusion, defended by fear, surrounded by yes-men. He looked toward his mother. I'm sorry, Mom. You raised me with values. I forgot the moment I tasted power. The judge took a deep breath and began reading the sentence. For the crimes of racketeering coercion, sexual abuse, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal criminal activity, this court sentences you, Sean Combs, to... The rest of the courtroom held its breath. 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before 20. Gasps, relief, some tears, a new sound, the sound of justice echoing back. As guards moved to escort Diddy away, he paused one last time. This time, no theatrics, no sunglasses. Just a final glance toward the gallery, as if trying to memorize the world before the walls would close in. Then he disappeared behind the door, and the gavel fell. Weeks after the sentencing, the ripples of the trial still moved through the cultural and legal landscape. The DOJ launched an expanded investigation into entertainment industry protections shell corporations, used for NDAs and patterns of systemic abuse shielded by fame. Multiple executives were subpoenaed. The silence was broken finally. Kash Patel, now operating under a heightened security protocol, gave a final press statement. Let this be a signal. No one is above the law, not money, not fame, not fear. Janice Combs returned to her quiet life, shielded from the press. She never gave another interview, but one final quote from her deposition echoed widely. My son was raised with love, not cruelty. But power raised him again into something I no longer recognized. The journal left behind by Father Marcel, now, under forensic review, had been verified as authentic. DOJ investigators confirmed that parts of it aligned with hidden audio timestamps. Though his death remained officially unsolved, the church began cooperating with authorities, for the first time in decades, reviewing internal confessional policies. Public discourse had changed. A generation once enamored with celebrity had found itself asking harder questions. What is accountability in an industry built to hide it? What does justice mean when money builds walls around the truth? Diddy remained in federal custody. His appeal was filed but lacked traction, overshadowed by his own words and evidence too weighty to deny. In a statement released by his legal team from prison, he wrote, I'm trying to understand the man I became. I only hope that time, silence, and reflection can lead me somewhere better. And so the world moved on, slower, sobered. But it did not forget, not the women, not the priest, not the truth. Justice had come imperfect, delayed, but real.